Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special LinkedIn Live edition of our AI Horizons webinar series. I am Stefano Puntoni, the Sebastian Kresge Professor of Marketing and Co-Director of AI at Wharton, and I am excited to welcome my colleague, Ethan Mollick, who is the Ralph J. Roberts Distinguished Faculty Scholar, Associate Professor of Management, and Academic Director of Wharton Interactive. You can watch previous episodes from our AI Horizon series at whr.tn/AI-horizons. You can also just Google Wharton AI Horizons, I suppose. And stay tuned for future episodes that will be released from our AI in the Future of Work conference that will be held on our Philadelphia campus later this month. Today, we will explore Ethan's new book, Co-Intelligence, where Ethan helps us dissect the complexities of our human potential to think, work, and live with AI and smart machines. And I have it here. It's a fabulous book, and I'm sure that many of the people listening today already ordered it, and many more will do so after seeing this LinkedIn Live session. I should say that I will also be publishing a book called Decision-Driven Analytics. It's going to come out next week on May 14.
Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you, Ethan. Later on, we'll be having a live Q&A with Ethan, so please make sure to put your questions in the comment section below. Okay, let's start. Ethan, I loved your book, but for our viewers online that haven't read it yet, could you give us a sense for the key messages of the book and what you're hoping that readers will take away from it?
Always hard to summarize an entire book, but there's a few things. I think the main goal was to try and give people a picture of where AI stood right now, the research that says that this is kind of a big deal, and also to kind of demystify it a bit. I think one of the main mistakes people make with AI is assuming because it's a technology product, it should only be used by technical people. You need extensive technical knowledge to be able to work with it, and that just isn't the case. So I talk about the sort of research, a little bit the future, but also a lot on like the roles that it can help you with, ways that it can be useful, and what that might mean for us as humans.
Yeah. And in the book, you say that it is impossible to make predictions about what will happen in a few years with AI. I also always say that I do not take punts for anything beyond 2 or 3 years. But it is possible to at least sketch some broad scenarios of how things might play out from here. And you do that towards the end of the book. And can I ask you to summarize what the key scenarios you see potentially on the horizon for all of us, and give us maybe some guess or assessment for what the likelihood of some of these, if you feel that's even
Sure. I
possible?
mean, so it's not that it's impossible to guess. It's just that we don't know the options. Like I was just talking to the CTO of Microsoft yesterday, and he's in the "this is going to keep going" camp. I've talked to people who I talked to one of the people doing training at Azure, and there's like, well, I don't know. I talked to OpenAI people; they're like, "This is going to go on forever." There is a lot of variation, and we don't know the answer. So it's not just that the systems are complex, but the people training these models do not know how good they're going to get for how long.
Mm.
But most of them seem to think that there's energy left in it. So I sketch out 4 scenarios. One is that the world stays static, which I think is increasingly unlikely based on everything that I'm seeing, especially as an early user of a lot of the sort of beta technology. And then sort of leaping to the 4th scenario, which is like AGI, a machine smarter than a human at every task. I think we tend to conflate that with the idea of a machine that murders us all or is self-aware. And I think people are worried about that, and they should be. There's enough serious people worried about it that we should have some concern. But the real goal of AGI is to build a machine that's smarter than humans at every task. And that is the explicit goal of OpenAI and company. I don't know whether it's achievable or not. There's reason to suspect they might be wrong, but they seem very confident. And so I think it's worth thinking about that. But I really worry that people aren't paying enough attention to what I call scenarios 2 and 3, which is either continued exponential growth, which is what we're seeing right now, a doubling time every 5 to 12 months, or else continued linear growth, where the AI gets a little bit better every year. And I think that those are more likely scenarios, and I don't think we're prepared for those either. I think a lot of people are indexing as if the world's static.
It seems to me that currently the pace of change has been exponential on the exponential. Let's say it's actually a lot faster than Moore's law itself. And the linear scenario probably not likely very much either, not very likely either. So I'm guessing that probably the most likely scenario is somewhere in between, where there is exponential growth, but maybe not for many years as fast as it has been over the last 3 years or so.
Yeah, but even if the technology were to ease off, right, it's not going to actually matter very much
Right.
because we haven't explored. Like people don't realize how much a GPT-4 class model alone can do. Like it's already enough to make a big difference. We're just not attaching all the tools to it needs. We're not building the human systems because all the AI companies are racing forward building the next technology.
Yeah, and there will be many ways to improve the same algorithms to perform better at specific tasks and make them useful for a lot of things where maybe right now we don't even use them at all. I mean, as a behavioral scientist, I found a lot of things in your book very interesting because it's just an endlessly fascinating topic. But and I think you write very well about the experience of using AI and also the moment that we live in. I found your points about anthropomorphism especially interesting. There's a lot of research in psychology, marketing, and other disciplines showing that the humanizing cues can help improve, for example, customer experience with chatbots. But there are also clear dangers in anthropomorphizing AI. What do you think about the risks and benefits of thinking of AI as a person?
So the reason you avoid anthropomorphizing is that AI is not a person. And calling it a person can get you kind of in trouble because you might think it knows things it doesn't, acts in ways it doesn't, that it acts with intention. None of those things are true, right? It doesn't actually think. However, it's trained on the vast corpus of human language and human knowledge. And the best way to work with it is to treat it like a person. So you're kind of in this interesting trap, which is how do you get AI to do things, right? Where it and effectively, and the answer is you treat it like a person and you're 90% of the way there, but you have to at the same time remember you are dealing with a software process, not a human. So that's you have to keep kind of both things in mind at the same time.
Yeah, it's this strange paradox where, on the one hand, you don't want to anthropomorphize, but on the other hand, it's actually quite useful to do so in the way that
I
you
mean,
play with it.
not only useful, absolutely necessary. You
Yeah.
you cannot use AI effectively without anthropomorphizing it because large language models are built on anthropomorphic data. So that's what they respond to. So it's not just like you have to, right?
Yeah.
And the coders are some of the worst people using AI because they desperately want to act like code, and instead code shouldn't give you different answers every time. It should insult your family, but AI does.
And I've had the luck to teach a executive program together with Ethan a few times, and I saw him run a session where it just shows what this thing can do and how do you work with it. And I think a lot of the examples that I've seen Ethan using as first very, very creative, sometimes even hilarious. I mean, it's just kind of weird and fascinating. What do you find some of the most maybe bizarre or like an eye-popping kind of experience that you've had with this thing?
I mean, I've had regular there's lots of moments where you're like, oh man, I can't believe it does this, right? So I for Gemini, I'm a nerd. You can see my games behind me. I do a lot of like role play. So I gave it like the equivalent of several books worth of role playing game experience, like Dungeons and Dragons sort of manuals, and I asked Gemini figure out the rules, create a character for me, create a story, and it was able to do that through this very complex rule set. I have I've had the AI do all sorts of any kind of ideation task. We know it's really good at work tasks. Like you get lots of use cases. I mean, that's part of why my argument has always been use it for everything, and that's how you figure out what it's good or bad at.
Yeah, and if you went back just a few years ago, when you ask people what is it that AI will never be able to do, people mention anything to do with emotions and anything to do with creativity, and that clearly is not
I mean,
the place for
absolutely
it.
clearly. So the paper came out last week showing like one of the things you want to do if you're a good therapist is you want to have people reframe their emotions, right? Take them and contextualize them in a different way. Very human thing, right? Empathy involved, emotional reframing. The AIs at the GPT-4 out of the box at the 87th percentile of being able to allow humans to reframe emotions. It beats doctors in terms of the empathy of its response, right? So there's a lot of very human things that the AI is very good at.
Yeah. In that sense, I think some of our stereotypes about algorithms and computers are really not helpful when you think about this thing.
Again, that's why treating it like a person, even though it's a bad idea, is also the only idea.
Now, thank you everyone who's still tuning in and watching online. Make sure you put your questions in the comments. Let me move to a different topic. You mentioned in the book that AI agents are clearly on the horizon. And, I've seen from your LinkedIn post and other things you've written that you're kind of toying with the idea of what this thing can be. Could you please define the idea of an AI agent and explore how these AI agents could change the way that we make decisions, the way we do stuff in our personal life or maybe in our professional life?
Okay, so I want to actually try something. We'll see if we can pull this off. I think since we're not in the studio together today, I think I can try and show remotely. Let me show you an agent at work. Let me see if I can do this possibly. Okay, we'll see if this lets me do it. We're going all high risk. I know I'm letting the technical team get very panicky, but okay. So this is called Devon. I am not endorsing Devon as like the tool. It's just an interesting early view of an agent. Apparently, they took some inspiration from some of my early posts, which I think is great. But so, what makes Devon interesting is because an agent is an AI system that's given autonomy and the ability to Where are we here? Let's see if I can launch a new one. We'll never know what happens here. Let's see. But the given autonomy and the ability to set goals. So I'm just going to see if I can figure out why this isn't operating the way I expect. Let's see. And I want to see if I can show you an example of this. Let me see. Start a new conversation with Devin. So what I can do is I can say something like, create a website for the Wharton AI initiatives. Look at initiatives. Look up what that is, and make it interactive and have some prompting quizzes. And I could just tell it, do this. And hold on, I'll fix the spelling because I can't spell anything. One moment here. And then we will tell it to just go. And let me hide this piece here. And so what the AI is going to do is it's just going to set up a plan and execute that plan to do this thing. So it's going to ping me if I ask questions. It's going to go ahead and do work. I'm seeing some people say it's not visible. Is the video visible now, folks, remotely? Can you see it?
Yeah, we see your.
Okay,
We see it.
great. But I want to show you an example of this. Like, here was an example where I was like, okay, somebody asked me to create, it's going to tell us answers here, create an interactive, awesome visual website about how to make pizza. So it's like, great, I will go ahead and create the project directory for doing this. And then I will write the code. And you can see as it goes through the process of doing research and it writes code, and you can't see all the code here, but and then it launches the site and it does the whole set of stuff around this and just checks back in with me when it's done. Right now, we can check our initial one. It's like, great, I'll start working by researching the initiatives to understand what this content to include. Then I'll proceed and execute on it. And my favorite example of these, let me just see if I can pull it up really easily here, is the one where I asked it to go on to Reddit. Let me see. Okay, this was fun. So I asked it to go onto Reddit, and I asked it to start taking requests on Reddit to create websites. And it did. You can see what actually it did was it went and it asked me, like, I can't do the CAPTCHA. Will you do the CAPTCHA for me? So I did the CAPTCHA for it. And then it actually launched, let me see if I can show you. It actually launched a website. And the crazy thing about it was it started to charge $50 to $100 an hour for people to give them web. And when I shut it down, it was already on its way to taking requests and responding to comments. And starting to figure out how to do charging. And then I shut the system down. So the idea with agents, right, is that they give us this ability to give systems the autonomous ability to do work on its own. And what that does is fit into human systems in a very different way. Because right now, the co-intelligence model often is that you're working with an AI and you're interacting with it. But if you could just assign it tasks like you would a contract worker, that changes the nature of work pretty profoundly.
And so I guess we'll all have to learn how to specify goals, how to make sure, because the issue is that, for example, you had not anticipated that the thing was going to go out and
but
start
they're going to
charging,
get.
right?
I don't think that's going to. I mean, look, management will be management. Like, human skills work, right? Management skills, persuasion skills, they tend to work on the AI. Great, no problem with that, right? Interesting, but I think that ability to I think we're shrinking what humans do pretty profoundly. We're like, you have to be good at making the AI not go. Like, it's pretty easy if the AI consistently goes and tries to charge people. It's very easy to fix that problem centrally, not rather than So I don't know if it's really going to be. I worry when people pick a skill set and they're like, we're going to be a prompt engineer in the future. You're going to be an AI manager. I mean, there'll be things that stuff is good for and things it's not.
So you say that the companies developing the agents will be able to set the appropriate guardrails and anticipate what people might be doing that is not.
Or the agents themselves will figure out what to do. Or the guardrails won't work. And then it doesn't matter if we have guardrails too, because there's going to be open source powered agents available that will soon be just posting stuff wherever you want. Like, the internet's going to become fairly unusable pretty quickly.
Okay. What do you mean by unusable? Just the quality of the information, the amount of information, the
I mean, we have hyper persuasive, like, so when you get into a debate with an AI, when GPT-4 has any information about you, you're 87% more likely to change your mind after getting into a debate with the AI than getting into a debate with an average human. So what that means is we have hyper persuasive tools that are semi-autonomous. Like, this is not like future stuff. This is all today. So I imagine, and because we'll have open source models that you can easily kind of strip out some of those safety protections, I think we're going to have a lot of AI scammers deployed that are interactive, right? But they'll also be doing good stuff. So I think it's going to be very hard because you're going to be interacting with machines on a regular basis and not necessarily know it.
in the literature, there have been quite a lot of discussion around the disclosure, both from the point of view of regulatory liability, kind of ethics, but also from the point of view of deploying this. For example, in marketing, there's a lot of discussion about the extent to which how do you make it clear that this thing is not a person? When do you bring in a person? And OpenAI itself, I think, is doing very interesting work in deploying some of these things. So, what do you think is the kind of responsibility from the side of the company or individual deploying these agents or AI technology more generally in the front line to disclose and guide kind of users' understanding of what it is that is happening when they interact?
I mean, I think that I think there's a general desire to be responsible from the major AI labs, right? I don't know if they match up ours or whatever. Like, I don't think it's just a fig leaf. They do seem to care when I talk to them. They're putting. I mean, if you haven't read the model spec that that OpenAI put out, I highly recommend that for anyone who's listening. I'll try and put it into chat. But it is it sort of outlines how they resolve differences and goals and our debates. So I think there's an effort to do it. But I mean, there's also high-powered open source models out there that we know you can easily strip the controls out of with just a little bit of work, right? So what I worry about is, like, we'll regulate, and I think we obviously will need regulation, but I kind of worry about preemptive regulation of the people playing along well, and not enough worries about what might happen, what's already break into the system. So I think we're going to need to think about solving some of these problems through mitigation rather than through stopping the source.
Right. I think the most dangerous users are not the commercial actors that a regulator can easily enforce. So to some extent, the worst scenarios might even be outside the scope of standard commercial kind of regulatory frameworks. Right?
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that you want to think about a lot is, okay, do we want, like, Josh Gans has this idea that I kind of agree with, which is the idea of being a fast regulator would be the ideal way to work, because we don't know the benefits and harms yet. So as harms emerge, we need to take action against those harms, but we also need to make sure that we are that we are not getting in the way of potential good uses, because some of the bad uses are baked in. So what you want is regulators watching very closely and reacting, and we're not there yet, right? So that's part of the issue here.
So the policymakers have been worldwide, I think, much more on the game on this than they've been on previous waves of technology. And I think one reason for that has been the very important and loud voices about, existential threats like, killer robots killing us all and stuff like that. Now, in the book, you highlight also that there are maybe more immediate dangers. Can I ask, I'm just curious, what is your take on this tension between, like the Terminator scenario, and is that good because it gets people's attention and people,
I feel I
or is
worry about
bad?
that. Look, I think that there are enough serious people worried about existential risk that I cannot index compared to them. And I can say, look, there's very smart people who are super worried about this. We should have concerns about this. And the more realistic are not so much Terminator as much as bad actors being enabled, right? So if we depend on criminals and terrorists being dumb, if everybody can genetically engineer viruses thanks to AI help, that's really bad, right? So I think that is a slightly more realistic version than AI wakes up and decides to murder us all, right? And I think that there's concerns about that. We don't know how realistic those are. What I am worried about, though, is the definitely bad stuff that's going to happen, right? We're definitely going to have, and we already have seen, deep fakes, non-consensual imagery, of people, in compromised positions. Like, that stuff's going to happen. Spamming at personalized phishing attacks, like, that is all baked in. So I kind of worry a little bit that we're not going to be thinking about mitigating some of those concerns. I also worry a little bit about over-regulating some of the areas where we need experimentation. There's such obviously powerful uses for this in medicine, And what I'm seeing is lots of doctors and experimentation happening secretly because the rules aren't clear about when you can experiment with these things. And there's a lot of rules that already restrain how AI is used in medicine and finance and other fields. But they were mostly written for algorithmic forms of AI prior to LLMs, and they're not that relevant, but they constrain use cases. So we need to think about how to both allow experimentation, but also like I don't want to only focus on doomsday scenarios because I really think that that's an area where we first of all have much less agency, and we have agency to shape the world right now for our regular use, right? Like we could decide what policies, like what do I want to talk about, and what use cases do I want to share, versus what do I want to not talk about, what do I want to emphasize in my organization, how do I use this to help humans thrive rather than hurt them? Like those choices we get to make, and I worry that if we make it about Terminators or not, or Oppenheimer, we only focus on things we have no control over.
Right. Yeah, and then maybe forget to pay attention to things where you really can make a difference today. A different question. If you were to step back and look at the performance of frontier models today, and I think I cannot think of a person who has a better sense for where that performance frontier lies today. Can you identify some common denominators in the limitations of LLMs today, and what kind of tasks do they tend to do, Paul, in your experience, and what does that say maybe about the need for human intelligence in the near future and maybe later?
So I think so. Let's just define terms for people who don't know. A frontier model. So there's right now a scaling law in AI, which is a pretty firm, law for. It's not a real law, but it's holding up for right now, right? Which is that and I wanted to try and show a graph, but I'm not sure if I can pull it off in time while doing other stuff. But the idea is that the larger the model is, which means the more expensive it is to train, the more expensive it is to run, the fewer companies that can build them, the better it is. And they're just generally better at everything. So GPT-4 is just better at medicine than a specialized medical AI. It's better at finance than specialized finance AI. So these frontier models are very capable. Right now, there's 3 of them. There's a 4th coming soon. The 3 ones are Claude 3 Opus, Gemini 1.5, and GPT-4. There's all of them have numbers because they're not going to stop, right? The new one that's going to be coming out very soon is Llama 3 300B, which is a GPT-4 class model to be open source, available to anyone to download for free and to work with, right? So these are the most advanced models. We don't know the limitations that well. If I was going to say what they're not great at, like if you are not good at prompting it, there's a lot of sameness. Like they'll give you great answers, but they'll feel very AI answers. But it turns out just a little bit of better prompting, you get rid of that problem and you get more diverse answers than you would before. They have blind spots the way a human would. There's biases built into these models because there's human biases. So, for example, if you ask them to write a letter of recommendation for a woman, they're more likely to mention the woman is warm, and they're more likely to mention a man as competent, which is the exact same bias we see in social psychology, slightly mitigated with the AI. But so there are like biases that we can't get at. Like it's hard to know the frontier what it's good or bad at. And you kind of get to build an intuition around this kind of stuff. We call this the jagged frontier. Like some things it's good at, some things it's bad at, and it's hard to know in advance. I would say the commonality of these sort of class of models is that they're quite good at they're not that great at planning and executing plans, which is what agents need to succeed. And there is and when you go to thinner parts of the model, like you're trying to get a solution to a very narrow problem where there's not a lot of data, you tend to get kind of samey answers. We don't know whether bigger data sets will extrapolate better. So there's a lot left to know.
And so I think it would be curious to see what in the coming months when new models are released, whether we see benchmarking these capabilities, whether the differences are staying as large as they were between, say, GPT 3.5 and 4, which is pretty substantial. I'm guessing they will. Do you have a sense for that? Maybe you toyed a bit.
Basically, the biggest question in the world is what is GPT-5? And that's not because of like hype or anything else. It's because we don't know whether this exponential curve is continuing. We don't know whether it'll drop to a linear curve. We don't know whether it's going to start reaching the top at sort of human level. We don't know any of those things, right? So we have had GPT-4 when it was released was so much better than any other model out there that it had a huge advantage. Now there's 3 models that have caught up to it. If GPT-5 is not a big leap forward, that might imply that we're hitting the top of the sort of at least first of the technology curves here. And so that tells us a lot about the shape of what the next year is going to look like. Everything I'm hearing from people who are using these models, no one's backing away. Like you're not hearing any senior person in any organization setting up room for failure. I know people are like, oh, AI hype. But there's a strong incentive if you're running a public company to not overhype something that's coming out in a month, right? Like that's not helpful for you or your customers. So I think we're going to see more big changes, but I think we might see other models released first, right? GPT 4.5, GPT Lite might be coming next week, which have other advantages. But we won't know until the next frontier model drops about what that curve looks like. And it's going to teach us so much, right? Because I think the startling thing about GPT 4 class models is how similar they are. Well, you can't do kind of production level prompts across all of them. Most prompts that humans would do, like normally if they're talking to the AI, work well across all the major models. That's weird. You shouldn't be able to do one thing across all the models. Like it's sort of like if you had Mac and Windows and they grew to have the exact same approach just because they got bigger. Like it doesn't quite work that way. So it's weird to see that happen here.
Yeah, and I have one final question before we move to the Q&A portion of the session. And so the book is called Co-Intelligence. And can you tell me a little bit about your choice of title? Why do you call it Co-Intelligence, and what do you think it is, bringing to mind, and what you're hoping that people will take from that label?
So I actually struggled a bit with this, to be very honest, because I think like I actually thought of a bunch of different things, and the book has to be written kind of far in advance. So I was thinking a lot about this. I got help with the title from my sister, by the way, who's a Hollywood producer. And originally we were kind of playing with coexistence, right? Because part of what I wanted to do was move away from the model of AI will either doom us or save us all, and try and make something about how like this is a human tool, and what we do with it is human, right? Technology is a human thing. That's one of Katzenberg's laws of technology. It's like an intensely human activity. And so I think part of what I wanted to do with co-intelligence was give this idea that this is both an intelligence of a sort, but it complements us and works with us if we're thinking about this well. And that's going to be our key to success.
It's time now for the Q&A portion of the interview. If you have any questions for Ethan, drop them in the comment section. We'll do our best to answer. Let me start with one question about how companies are meant to kind of deal with the current situation. So this is a question. If the development of AI is exponential, how will businesses navigate implementing technologies that may soon become obsolete?
So I tend to think about companies as having two decisions. They have two things they need to think about, right? I mean, there's more, but the basic view is there is something you're doing that's obsolete. Absolutely. But there's also something you can do that's now impossible. So the companies that succeed are the ones that think about that stuff. I think about the Industrial Revolution, and the mistake, like the companies that didn't survive the Industrial Revolution were the ones that, when they got steam power, decided to keep their, whatever there was, their brewery going, but remain a local brewery and fire some of the people so that they can keep the small brewery going. The ones that succeeded were the ones that used steam power to multiply their efforts, right? And so I think the same thing is going to happen here. We're going to see some things made obsolete. Like that's not necessarily a bad thing, but jobs are not one thing. Jobs are many things. Our job is a bundle of tasks. And some of the bundle of tasks are going to disappear during this time. Some of them are going to change, and some are going to be better at than the AI, and it will concentrate on further. I think that we should be thinking about that kind of approach. And again, it's something we can guide forward. But yes, something your company does, that was a huge differentiating factor is probably not important anymore. Like maybe you wrote really great, letters to people. Maybe you were able to do really good, had very good advice or mentoring from managers. The AI might be better at that. But then what impossible thing can you do? What happens if you have your vending machines can all talk and give psychological advice and also tell people to buy sodas? I don't know, right? We have to figure this out together. There's an exploration piece as well.
And here's the next question. The role of leaders in business is more often asking questions, making judgment calls, and dealing with personnel issues. How can the leaders use AI to be better at this? I should say, Ethan, before you start, that this is actually quite a big topic in my own book. So, but I love to hear your perspective on.
I will definitely read it. I mean, so the core idea of co-intelligence is you have an advisor or helper. We know from our studies that actually it gives very good advice. So, right, amazing controlled experiment by colleagues at Stanford and at Harvard found that when Kenyan small business owners were given access to GPT-4 for just advice, not doing any work for them, the low performers suffered for a bunch of interesting kind of reasons, but the high performers had an 18% improvement in the profitability. That suggests to me that AI advice is a quite useful tool. So if I were a manager, this would be middle management is one of the roughest jobs in the world. Even leadership is one of the rough, because you're doing many things, right? You have to have insights into technology, but also be good with people, but also be able to, politically say something correctly and also do marketing. And like, that's a lot. and not everyone's good at all those tasks. So that's again where AI can be very helpful. So I would be using it in an advisory role, and figure out what it's good or bad at, and figure out where I need to concentrate my ability as a human.
And here's a different type of question, one that is more about consumers. And how do you think over time consumers will come to value AI-created art and music? Perhaps, a broader question about AI outputs more generally. So here the question says, not AI used as a tool to execute, but as a creative force itself.
So, I mean, I don't know if you've seen, if you haven't played with Udio or Suno, you should. The music tools have gotten very good very quickly. I was just talking to a guy who won 4 Grammys earlier this week, and he's like, "Yeah, I use this all the time." I was speaking to the head of Atlantic Records. They're like, "Our artists are using these all the time for inspiration." So some stuff is going to get less valuable than it was. Some stuff is going to get more competitive. We don't know how this is all going to shake out, right? AI makes pretty good music at this point. Is it as good as the top 1% of people? You have to be in the top 0.01% to get a contract. Those people are going to be better than the AI for now. Does it reach human level? We don't know, right? I mean, the pleasant version of this is thinking about the synthesizer, which when it came out, there was a lot of controversy over it because it made people who weren't good at music able to produce music of a sort. Was that good or bad? Well, it created entirely new forms of music. So I don't think we're going to end human concerts and human interaction, right? But I do think it's going to change the nature of art and music in ways that other technologies have as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of interesting questions in this area, and some of the research I've done in the last few years have been actually exactly on that. For example, we show that people are more interested in machine-made products in situations where they're consuming for more instrumental reasons, less symbolic, less identity-related, and stuff like that. And so there might be also interesting, boundary conditions to the extent to which we welcome AI in different consumption domains, of course. Let me move to a different question, one that is quite interesting. And one of your recent research papers that got a lot of interest is this work that you've done together with the BCG, or Boston Consulting Group. And here's a question about that. In your work, you find that people, BCG consultants, who are lower in skill and knowledge did profit more from GPT, but at the same time, you need skills to check outputs for hallucinations. How do you square that circle?
So the issue is, so the standard I tend to think about when I think about hallucinations is what I call BAH, best available human. Is the AI better or worse than the best human you have access to? And I think a lot of hallucinations absolutely happen. The question is, what fields does that matter in and where does it not matter? And I think we have to think about when we use AI to do that. The upskilling thing is actually kind of interesting. Like the AI is effectively upskilling people by doing their work. Now, the question we have is like, okay, is this a temporary state of affairs where naively using AI makes you, right now raises you if you're to everybody the 8th percentile because the AI is at the 8th percentile. In the longer term, does it raise everybody up by 5 times performance? Are best performers multiplied by 50 times? Are there certain AI whisperers who get 100 times performance? We don't know the answers because it's early days. So the first set of research really tells you that people who, like, the AI is really good, right? And so even though it might be less good than the 90th percentile human, it was as good as the 80th percentile BCG consultant, essentially. So it uplifted all of their work to that level.
Yeah. Here's the question. We covered this a little bit, but maybe you can reflect on it a little bit more. How do you see agents play a role in emotion-related interactions between humans and AI? Would it work? Emotions are very nuanced.
I mean, it seems to. All I can tell you is off the bat, AI seems very good at emotional work. We're away from having a registered therapist, but the number of people having relationships and emotional interactions with AI, there's some early work of people who are desperately lonely using AI companions that suggest that it actually lowers suicidal ideation, helps them actually talk to people in the world, but it's too early. And as you know, Stefano, from your extensive research, we don't know the long-term effects on the emotional side. We have earlier models were very bad at this and quite dangerous to use as your research has shown. Newer models, we just don't have enough tests yet to indicate, when they can be helpful and when they can't. They certainly seem to simulate emotions, but do they simulate in the right way to help people out? We don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, and I think going back to the best available human, my tinkering with GPT-4 and some research that we are very, very much work in progress suggests that actually the latest generation of models are really good. So, and they'll probably get better too. a different type of question, again, very much different from the emotions and therapy kind of context we were just talking about. Here's one about industrial processes. What factors could be important when it comes to human AI interaction in the industrial processes? What should we be concerned about when we are designing AI tools for process operators?
So, in what sort of process kind of becomes the big question, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I
Imagine
mean,
like maybe a production line or maybe a
so
service
LLMs
operation.
are weird, right? They're not good at the stuff an algorithmic system would be good at, right? But they're good at a bunch of other stuff. Like one of the most interesting kind of uses of AI that I've been spending some time thinking about is there's a bunch of efforts. GPT-4V, which is the visual component, and now Claude does this and Gemini does this too. Like you could put a webcam looking at a dial, and it can actually go ahead and read the dial and tell you if there's a problem. It can look at a factory floor and tell you if there's issues, right? So I think part of the issue has been a move away from management inside of industrial processes to automation of the process. This allows some kinds of automation of management, for better or for worse. I think we're in the early days, right? There's some early suggestions that this may be the gap. LLMs may solve the gap in industrial robotics that we've had of planning and environment navigation. We just don't know. So I would say the physical goods side is there's a huge upside, but not as much experimentation compared to intellectual work.
Right. Yeah, I think the discussion is usually more about process work, knowledge work, and that has been one thing that has gotten a lot of attention in the media, precisely because typically we don't see automation that maybe is more threatening or relevant to people at the higher end of the income scale. But this one,
I mean,
certainly is
everything we're
different.
showing is that's exactly what it is, right? Yeah, I mean, Stefano, your job and mine is number 22 on the list of 1,016 most affected jobs, business school professor by AI, right? But I'm not worried because, again, I think my job bundle is changing. Like I'm going to do different things than I did before. No one would have designed an educational system with unlimited resources where I teach several hundred students a year, right? And don't have direct contact with most of them. This might change things for the better as well as, potentially in other ways.
For sure. What do you think? We can maybe, I don't know if there will be questions on the role of AI in education. That will be an area where we could have just an hour discussion just on that. But changing the air, something very different. Mustafa Suleyman has this sentence. He's recently joined Microsoft. I would be sorry. I don't know what's going to happen to Pi. I think Pi was such a nice bot.
I think that was a soft close down of Pi, right? That was, I mean, basically what Microsoft has been very clever in terms of taking over the AI world without upsetting the FTC. And so this struck me as very much like a soft takeover, a back down of Pi, right? Like
Yeah.
it didn't do.
Yeah.
I mean,
I like
I think what it
I like
shows you, by
Pi.
the way, sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I like Pi. I think it
Pi
was
is
a very
great. Pi is, and if you haven't tried it, by the way, it's a really interesting conversational AI. And absolutely think about using it. I think part of the issue is Pi shot its shot, and its new model or the Inflection 2 model just wasn't up to GPT-4 standards. So why would you keep training models when you could basically a customized version of Llama, which will be out there for everybody, will be able to do the kinds of things Pi could do.
Anyway, there is a question about Mustafa Suleyman's statement that AI is a new species. What do you think of that?
I mean, I don't think that's technically correct in any way. Like I find like these large scale doomsday, treat. I mean, I use the alien analogy in my book a lot, but I don't mean it literally. Like I think that it I mean, species implies a whole bunch of biological functions and goal setting and things that AI doesn't have. Right now, AI is a super advanced tool that emulates thinking without thinking, right? It might become something different, but there's a big leap between that and a species that we have to, live with on Earth and has its own goals and its own, we need to respect its boundaries and it needs to respect ours. I do think that, I respect Suleiman's work a lot. I think he's very focused on a potential future, 10 years or 15 years from now. And I'm a little bit more focused on the next year or so of kind of present of like, what does this mean? Because there's sort of this hand waving of like, in the end, we will coexist with our robot overlords or friends. But there's a process that gets us there. And these things still need to be in data centers with power running on servers. It's not an autonomous, machine running around that with its own brain.
Right. Here's a more technical question, maybe, or at least a more specific. This is a question. This morning, you posted about seeing hallucinations using fine-tuning and RAGs. I'm feeling comfortable with prompt engineering right now, and I'm considering going deeper into RAGs and fine-tuning based on what you wrote this morning. Is it worth it?
Okay, so let's just explain this for people who don't know the technical stuff. The AI is generic. So you make the AI's answers less generic by giving it context. And there's a bunch of ways of giving context. The easiest way to give context is just paste stuff in that you want the AI to know. And that turns out to work really well, especially as AIs get larger and larger memories, larger context windows. You can just paste more and more stuff in. Now, it's expensive, but this is an effective technique. The next level, but then there's a lot of companies and organizations trying to figure out how you get more information to the AI. One way to do that is called RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Basically, the AI secretly does a web search, or somebody else secretly does a web search tool, and then inserts what the results are into the AIs. It might be searches of your documents, but like if you say, how do I, I have a itchy mosquito bite, it would presumably search. It was a medical AI, you'd have a search of itchy and mosquito bite, and it would pull back information, stick it into your response. So the AI would have that context to work from. That's called RAG, retrieval augmented generation. And I have my doubts about RAG as a technique because the AI still hallucinates and makes stuff up. It just feels more authoritative. The highest level of making the AI's context fit with you has been called something called fine tuning, where you basically add additional training on top of the AI, fine tuning it for a particular purpose. This new paper suggests that that doesn't work as well as people thought. So I've been a big fan of just like large context windows for the kind of work most people do. But I think learning RAG techniques and fine-tuning techniques are useful. That's hot right now. But we are in a very evolving situation where I think the technologists often have a gap between how use is actually working versus how they think it's working. And, we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, and I remember our colleague Kartik Ozanaga saying something like, it's a time when you want to date many, you might not want to marry. So there might be a time when you want to explore techniques like RAG and fine-tuning, but be open-minded about what's emerging. Here, a question about regulation. We talked earlier about, you had this mention to fast regulation. Here's a question about that. I love the idea of fast regulation, but how do you balance the trade-off between regulation and innovation?
Well, I mean, the whole idea of fast regulation is to get around that problem by looking at emerging harms and stop them before. Like we are going to have a whole bunch of good stuff and a whole bunch of bad stuff come from AI, right? So there's a regulation of existential risk, which is very crude right now. Like I don't know if you saw, Stefano. I was just online discussion yesterday, and I found out where the threshold for dangerous AI comes from. And it's a footnote of a Stanford paper citing a Our World in data table. And basically what they did was they just added an order of magnitude to GPT-4 and said that's dangerous. And that was okay when it was a reporting requirement, but it's now being written in as like a forbidding level for governments, and there's no science behind it, right? So the danger is that you do these things preemptively. Now, for existential risk, maybe that's worth doing. I don't know, right? But for a lot of work of like, what is the effect in finance or in healthcare? What you'd want is regulators working very closely with industry and with the consumers who are affected and stakeholders and watching. And as soon as stuff starts looking like it's going bad, issue quick bans and direction changes. And that's how you don't stifle innovation as much, right? But we don't have the capability to do that. And I worry that entirely preemptive approaches could be problems.
Yeah. We are running a bit out of time, so I'm not sure we'll be able to go through all the questions that we have, but let me try. Maybe we can do two. Can you suggest practical ways to change human perceptions of AI towards a positive direction to boost collaboration with AI?
I have a strong suspicion at this point that people abstractly dislike AI, but in person actually quite like it. My main advice is the same advice I give about everything: use the system. The more you use it, the better off that you do, and the more you'll kind of demystify it. Like people seem to both be very upset about using AI for things, but then use them ubiquitously. I don't know if I believe the latest Microsoft LinkedIn study that 75% of people using AI at work. I'm not quite sure where that number is coming from, but I do think that there is like the use is pretty ubiquitous, and people aren't scared when they actually use these systems. So I think it's a lot of difference between an abstract view when you're asked like, are you worried about the future of AI? I mean, I think everybody is. Is that the same thing as I hate AI? I think that's a different question.
I think there is a parallel maybe to literature and stereotyping, where people may have stereotypes about minority groups, but then when they get to know them and interact, they feel very different about the individuals, and maybe that helps shape the stereotype itself over time. So actually, this idea of contact, working with AI might actually change a lot of your beliefs about about it. So one final question, then we're going to wrap up. Can you talk about how AI can be used in entrepreneurship and the world of startup? And you know a lot about entrepreneurship, so I'm sure you have great ideas about
Yeah, I
this.
mean, I think this is one of the more exciting areas, along with education. The thing about entrepreneurs is you have to be a jack of all trades. You have to do many things, and entrepreneurs often get tripped up because one of their two of those things they can't do, and so they need a co-founder, they need other work. So even leaving aside technical co-founders and other concerns, one of the most exciting things is, look, I need a first pass at a legal contract. Obviously, if I was a big company, I would send this to a lawyer. But when I was running my startup, I read a lot of legal contracts and did my best on them, and that was stressful and took a lot of time because I couldn't afford a lawyer at the time I was doing it. Having Club 3 do a pass is pretty good. Building websites and marketing materials can be very stressful. You're a technical founder. You don't like to write email. It writes emails for you. Maybe English isn't your first language. It does that. You want to apply for grants or money. It's great for that stuff. It obviously can help you technically multiply the work of your coders. It can help you answer questions. We know it gives good advice and increases the chance of success. Like, to me, that's a no-brainer solution for a lot of problems in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's exciting, and our students have lots of great ideas, and I think it's one of the most exciting parts of this moment. I think is what it can generate in terms of entrepreneurship and new ideas. Now we're coming to the end. Thank you for listening to a special LinkedIn Live episode of AI Horizons. I want to thank my guest, Ethan Mollick. Ethan, thank you for making time. I think you were, as always, this great combination of interesting and informative. And so thanks for being with us. Thank you
Thank
to our Knowledge at Wharton and our analytics at Wharton teams. Look for upcoming episodes featuring top AI experts on the latest AI topics at ai.wharton.upenn.edu. For more resources on AI analytics, check out my new book. It's coming out next week on May 14. And of course, Ethan's new book, Co-Intelligence, Living and Working with AI, which is available now for purchase. Finally, consider staying engaged by checking out our generative AI class from Wharton Executive Education. Follow us on LinkedIn at AI at Wharton and many other things that Wharton is doing around the space of AI. Thank you again, Ethan. I'm Stefano Puntoni. Thank you for joining us today.